Hi, this is Emily Freitag, and I'm so happy to be talking today with Sawyer Altman at Goblins. I got a chance to see Goblins in a high school math classroom a couple weeks ago. And Sawyer, as we do with all of these interviews, we're excited to hear about you, about the product, and about the impact you're striving for. So let's jump in to your story. What brought you to the point that you are here working on this very exciting math product?
Yeah, Emily, thanks for hopping into that session. It was great having you there, and thanks for setting this up. Um, my story, so I'm a longtime computer geek. Throughout my career, I've kind of woven in and out of tech and education. And actually, most recently, I was teaching at a public high school here in New York City. And I had this problem where I had 30 kids in my pre-calculus class, and there was one of me, and their heads were all over the place. And that made my life somewhat difficult. I was always trying to keep tabs on where all the kids' heads were at, and I was always trying to differentiate the content for every student. I had one student in my class who exclusively spoke Mandarin. I don't speak any Mandarin. It just was very clear to me that it was an impossible task. I'd love having those one-on-one sessions with my students where I could look at their work and I could work backwards and infer what was the misconception here, and I could really like build that conceptual foundation. But there just wasn't enough of me to go around. And so Goblins is in many ways the tool that I wish I had when I was teaching. We'll often say to teachers, like, what if you could be in 30 places at once? And we have this kind of tongue-in-cheek tagline we'll often use. It's like the math teacher cloning device.
Mhm.
Essentially, the way it works is, it can be used across tiers 1 through 3. Essentially, a teacher could either assign content, standards align curriculum content from a large database. We have another way where we can just learn students over time and show them content. But the essential premise is we are able to use an interactive whiteboard, and it's fully multimodal. So students can draw, they can speak, and then we can do what a great teacher does, which is we can look at their work and then proactively figure out what is the misconception, and then again build that conceptual foundation in real time.
Mhm. And so tell us how it's used in practice. Within a lesson, where does the product come into play? What does it do? What does it show the teacher?
Yeah, great question. I'll say at a very high level, it is very flexible. It is often used in a supplemental setting so that anytime the students would be doing independent practice in class, instead of giving the students a piece of paper, you'll give them goblins instead.
Mhm.
And essentially, there's a couple benefits here. One, Goblins is going to do way more differentiation because it's going to have that one-on-one connection with the students, going to be looking at their work, helping them in real time, super engaging. The kids can be engaged while also, obviously learning.
Mhm.
And then there's a whole analytics side of Goblins as well, which is, when a teacher is just grading the student's work, they see the final output rather than the whole process.
Mhm.
Whereas because we're having a natural conversation with the student, we can see that whole process. And so we're seeing so much more. And so we're actually able to provide insights to the teacher by digesting across all of these conversations which students are struggling the most, but also which concepts are they struggling with the most. They can
Mhm.
drill down as much as they want to into transcripts and replays. We give them way more data and also make it way more actionable than were they to go through the tedium of having to look at all the students' final output. Yeah. And so,
Great.
in practice, piece of paper, instead they use goblins. That's supplemental, could be used at home also. And then there's also more of like a tier 2, tier 3 intervention style use case. Every interaction with goblins teaches us more about where the kid's head is at, and then we get better at figuring out what's the appropriate next thing to show them. And
Mhm.
so we have a whole other mode of goblins. We call it infinite mode, which is like an adaptive tool, but in that it's picking problems. Different than adaptive tool in that it's not just like right, wrong, and then kind of pushing them up or back. It's actually where we noticed they struggled before and then putting them exactly on that.
Mhm.
And then the actual experience itself is the kind of thing you might just have to see, and I'd be happy to show you.
Yeah, why don't you show us some? I was impressed at how much the students liked interacting with goblins. It felt like they found it to be a pretty smooth experience. So why don't you show us what it looks like and what you're proud of and how you've designed it?
Cool. Yeah, happily. So I have an assignment actually ready to go here. A lot of ways to get into the students' hands. First, let me just kind of drop you into this experience so you get a feel for what it's like when they're in.
Hey, welcome. In a second, you'll get to solve some problems, and I'm going to try to help you. But first, let me show you a few ways I can help.
So I'll just hit the OK here.
For example, you can show me your work at any step, and I'll give hints or redirect you as needed.
Cool.
And once you get the final answer, I'll mark it right, and we'll move on to the next problem. Okay, your turn. Try drawing the answer, and then hit OK.
So Goblins works on every device. I can do this on my mobile phone, iPad, whatever it is. I'm using a
Chromebook,
non-touch
yeah,
screen,
all of
the
it.
whole shebang. We have a feature where they can hold down the space bar and then they can just like draw freely on the trackpad. It feels very much like a touch device.
Nice. Let me just erase that for you. You can also speak your answer, or ask things like, I'm stuck, what should I do next? Or what's the formula again? Give that a try.
I'm stuck. What should I do next?
Coming in loud and clear. Okay, here's the first problem. Go on ahead. I'll be here.
So Emily, I'm in this interactive whiteboard space. I can just pan and zoom like this. I can have a natural conversation with Goblins. So I could say, I have no idea how to start this problem. And I could say, what do you think is a good first step here? And it would start like getting the student unstuck. I can do this in 40 different languages. I can have the kids talk to Gandalf if we want to, just have a little fun. And then I can also show my handwriting. And I can go down a bunch of different paths. So if we wanted to subtract 1 from both sides, that's totally cool. A lot of students will take the square root here. And a lot of students know, well, you take the square root of 9, and that should equal 3. And what I'll do is I'll send this through. And Goblins is basically going to look at the student's work, and it's going to think, what path did they go down?
X equals 3 is one of the answers. But since we're dealing with x squared, is there another number that makes 9 when you multiply it by
Sweet.
itself?
And it circles this area here. Goblins, the way it wants to work is it wants the student driving as much as possible. And it's going to pump the brakes. And it's going to say, hey, this student has a pretty good sense for what's going on. So anything else going on here? And so the student can say, well, okay, I need that plus or minus, of course. Or they can put the x equals -3 below. And it'll be very versatile how it accepts the response. Of course, in my class with my students, they could have struggled with a ton of different things here. They could have struggled balancing both sides of the equation. They could have struggled with taking the square root. They could have struggled, of course, with this notion that there's going to be 2 solutions. For a student who really has that foundational, those gaps from previous years, Goblins can also go deeper with them. It can do something like this. I'm super confused and I have no idea what you're talking about. And so whatever that...
Square roots are tricky. I totally get why you're confused. How about this? Hop into this lesson real quick. I'll teach you why there are 2 solutions to this problem.
So whatever that misconception might have been, it can create this mini lesson in real time.
Let's start here. What is the square root of 4?
And we'll start actually going deeper. And this is where that differentiation comes in most prominently.
That's right. The square root of 4 is 2 because 2 times 2 equals 4.
And it's this very bite-sized Socratic style dialogue.
Now things get interesting when we're dealing with equations. You might assume that x equals 2 here.
Okay, I'll give it one more.
But actually, when we take the square root in situations like this, we get a positive and negative value, which means we get 2 solutions. Can you think of why?
And so, the student can say yes, they can say no, they can say, I don't know, they can go in any direction. Ultimately, it'll lead them to this idea, of course, 2 negatives times itself equals a positive. And then I'll shortcut out of this. It'll actually encourage the student to go back to the original problem and apply what they just learned. Kind of have the gratification of having done it themselves. So it should give them
winning.
Awesome. If there's more problems, they can keep going. And then, like I was saying,
let's pause there for 1 second. I have one question, Sawyer. So it's trying to help students get to the right answer. Is there anything else that it's giving them feedback on in terms of their thinking or how they get to that answer? And we've noticed across products, there's different theories about, do you have you got a 3 out of 4, or you got just a binary yes, no, you got it. How did you all think about some of those choices?
Yeah, I would rephrase it. It's not so much trying to get them to the right answer. It's trying to get them to the conceptual foundation they need to get to the answer themselves. And it's trying to do that while keeping them in the realm of productive struggle as much as possible. And so that's why that mini lesson is there. It doesn't want the student just flailing around in discovery mode for forever. If it notices the student is significantly struggling, it's going to try and figure out what that is. And then it's going to build that foundation and then bring them back.
Got it. Great. You were going to go on maybe to what the teacher sees.
Yeah. So like I was saying, from the teacher's perspective, they get all kinds of analytics, and I should be able to exit out of this, and I'll hop us over there. And so, for example, I'll go into a sample assignment right here. You can see, I'll come back here. I'll zoom in a little bit too. You can see, imagine we've got three different problems, excuse me, a bunch of different problems and three different students. You can
Mhm.
see a grid of all the problems they worked on. You get this very quick sense for like how much support did the student need to actually get to the solution. So here, Jonathan struggled a bit. It seems like Chisholm significantly struggled here. Let's go into Jonathan's conversation. I can see the transcript for that entire conversation, all of our opinions about the student's work. I can actually watch a replay of like how their thinking has evolved.
Mhm.
It looks like because this is a sample, this doesn't want to load, but in theory I could, and I could anonymize their work and show it off to,
Class or
yep, get the student talk going.
hmm
And then I get a very high level summary after the fact of like, what do I need to know? What's actionable here? So
hmm
we see, for example, a majority of students struggle with solving quadratics. That included Jonathan failing to identify the negative root when taking the square root, and Daniela making arithmetic errors when isolating terms. And if I click into that, I can see the exact moment when this happened. I get this like quick canonical sense as a teacher for what's going on and what are
hmm
the common pitfalls, where should I focus my attention, how did my lesson land. After enough of this, it will learn the students more, and we'll start figuring out like what are our small group recommendations for your students, what content might you want to assign to them. This is increasingly becoming more real time also. So like
hmm
while the teacher is like administering goblins, we're giving them encouragement to actually intervene. Hey, we saw five students struggle with this. You might want to actually work with them on this skill.
Is that
Essentially,
a real-time nudge that's coming to teachers?
that's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
And part of the shtick here is we're trying to uh, help teachers use the most of their single self for all 30 kids. Essentially,
Mhm.
what is the best use of your time? How can you be most effective building them
Mhm.
leverage?
Great.
Mhm.
And so, overall, what impact do you hope Goblins will offer to the teachers that use it and to the students that use it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So starting with the teachers, I mean, one obvious thing is we're one saving them time. Again, because grading is like seen as this necessary evil. We're giving them more powerful analytics such that you get all the taste without the calories, so to speak.
Mhm.
And then we're also helping improve the tier one instruction. And so what a lot of teachers, sort of the state of the art to this day is still very much you've got these screeners, and then you maybe have some kind of like diagnostic or assessment happening in between your screeners. And the
Mhm.
screeners are terribly infrequent and they're very abstract. It's, we notice these are the weaker standards, these are the stronger standards, and so
Mhm.
on. What we're trying to do is we're trying to give them like, hey, this thing that you just assigned could have been 10 minutes ago. Here's exactly where the students are at with it. And this is our recommendation for what to do next. And
Mhm.
so we're trying to compress, essentially, instruction happens at the same time as assessment. We're
Mhm.
trying to kind of compress that feedback loop. And obviously, improve the growth that they're seeing with their students and help them support their students as best as possible. One thing I know just from talking to a lot of teachers and having been one myself is that you get into the profession, to send these kids in the best possible path as you can, and that feeling that like you are at your limits and it is like just physically not possible is dispiriting. And so part of it is that we talk to a lot of teachers and like, hey, I finally can do way more. There's like a hopeful feeling. We definitely want
Mhm.
to give that. And then for the students, obviously, well, one, a lot of students just don't get anywhere near this kind of feedback. We know some great teachers who feel a lot of guilt about the fact that they just can't look at every student's assignment or can't do it in the time scale that they're hoping to because life gets in the way and some of them have however many preps. It could be seven
Yeah.
preps a year of it, that stuff happens.
Yeah.
And so the students are getting way more feedback, and they should be growing faster. There should also be we hear students all the time say, like, I feel supported.
Mhm.
A lot of students feel shy about asking questions in class. They don't want to appear dumb in front of their peers. They like the feeling that there's this very patient thing that doesn't judge them. And then,
Mhm.
very importantly, actually can empathize with them and is actually worth spending their time with. Um, and yeah, that's kind of a liberating feeling that we've heard from a lot of students. There's an equity angle also. A lot of students, when they're at home, don't have a parent who, especially as you get to the higher level math, who can, support them. And this could be true at any level, of course. And so this notion of like, kind of leveling the playing field, we want to also provide that.
And what do you know so far about how it's doing against the job of, in particular, more student growth?
Yeah, it's a good question. We see very clearly, we don't have, any large scale RCT, but we're now working with about 50,000 students. And we see very clearly on our internal metrics of standard growth, which is just basically, statistical algorithms, classic IRT type stuff. You show them an item and your prediction gets better over time for how they're doing. We see like very clearly, the more you use Goblins, there's a strong linear relationship. For example, when you take the bucket of students who have solved like 1 to 50 problems compared to the bucket of students who have solved 500 problems, and you interpolate everywhere in between, of course, it just looks like this. Like they have mastered many more standards. And so it's very clear that Goblins is an effective use of time for learning. We're pretty confident about that. Obviously, without an RCT, we're working on those. You can't really know, what
Causal
the counterfactual
versus,
would be, how to subtract the baseline. One thing we do know, which is actually very interesting, is it is often the students who are the least engaged who engage the most with Goblins. That's something you asked what it's something we're proud of. That's something we're extremely proud of. Because it's often the opposite. I think that's extremely rare with education technology. For example, our infinite mode, we notice actually the greatest amount of growth occurs in infinite mode. Our immediate assumption when we saw that was, well, of course, the students who are the most engaged, say at home or they're fast finishers in class, etc., they're going to do more problems in infinite mode. So of course that's what's going on. And then we looked, and it was actually the weakest students who were spending the most time and solving the most problems in infinite mode. And that was huge. It basically suggests that a lot of these students, like I was saying, who didn't feel supported, finally do feel supported. We talked to them, and that's a lot of what they said. And it's like, hey, this works for me. I'm actually like learning now.
And so why don't we close with just what's on your product roadmap? What do you want Goblins to do better? What are you kind of thinking about adding? I think we covered this, but it's just math right now. Any plans to change that, or are you sticking in just the math lane?
Yeah. Our sense is that there's a massive need, across the United States and frankly beyond, just to get math right. It's really hard to get math right. Math is a domain which just requires a lot of polish for fit and finish, and so we're happy sticking here for the foreseeable future. But yeah, there's a ton of stuff in the roadmap. I mean, there's a lot of places to push this. Um, a couple things to highlight. One of them on the teacher side, for example, that kind of things we noticed. There's an obvious opportunity to make, these traditional dashboards where we can put natural language on them and we can try and make them as actionable as possible. But large language models just create this. I mean, there's nothing more natural than just like talking it out. And so making it much easier to help teachers get the content they need into the students' hands. It's just a huge priority of ours. And we think there's actually quite an opportunity to expand on that natural language type query that you saw with like the things we noticed. So go into a student profile. What should the student be working on? Where's the student struggled recently? Same in the class level. If I'm a district admin, I can say, what are my schools who are growing the most? Where are they growing the most, et cetera. And we've seen that paradigm in a couple other products, haven't really seen it in EdTech, but we think it'd be really powerful for time constrained teachers and its staff. That's one thing. Another is that infinite mode. We were really encouraged by the growth that we saw in it, and we think there's some obvious places to push it further. One thing that we know we could do, we actually invite students from a local school to come to the office, and we tutor them in person without Goblins mostly, just kind of building our empathy with them. And those sessions are very free flowing. It's not just one practice item after another practice item. Just predicting problems to practice is good, but we think there's, in those sessions, what makes them so magical to some extent is we can say, hey, you remember we worked on last week? This is going to be kind of similar to that.
Hmm.
Almost like this agent happening at one level removed from the problem suggestion.
Hmm.
That gives you this sort of like free-flowing flexibility to develop some rapport with the
Hmm.
student, to really understand what the student knows and doesn't know in a way that's not just solving the problem.
Hmm.
And then, frankly, if a student's working on foundational skills, like one student we work with who's technically in Algebra 2 struggles with, really early middle school and late elementary school concepts still. And so we'll often kind of peel back the layers of the onion. And there are occasions in which the appropriate thing to do is reteach that concept, from the top. And so we already do a bit of this, but we want to get better at doing a lot of that reteaching, which we think would be really strong for filling in those gaps. So those are just, I would say, two
Hmm.
cherry-picked things from a
Great.
very long roadmap of things we're excited about.
Thanks for sharing. I lied about the final question. I have one more. Tell
Hit
us
me.
why
Go for it.
goblins? Why name it goblins?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we've only elaborated on so much. I think the first thing is we just wanted to be a little different and fun.
Hmm.
We wanted kids to hear that and be like, it's called what? It didn't sound like your normal math tool. The second thing is we realized very early on when testing, you saw there's this voice interface.
Hmm.
It was very clear to us that the kids wanted to personify this character.
Hmm.
It just naturally, there's something just biologically active about having this, vocal type conversation. And kids asking questions like, "What's your favorite food?" Which is a ridiculous question to ask,
Yeah.
this
A
disembodied,
math tutor bot. Yeah. Hmm.
right, things like that. And so we think there's an interesting opportunity to create these characters, essentially essentially these companions to which the student feels accountable, which
Hmm.
supports the student, kind of sticks with the student over time. And as we started thinking about, what would this look like, if we created a narrative around it or tried to make sense of what these companions are doing here. We came up with this kind of goofy concept where essentially there's a parallel universe in which everyone's really good at math, and we've essentially created this exchange program between the universes where essentially their universe it happens to be extremely boring, so the exchange is these teenagers teach us math, and in exchange we teach them like how to be cool or something like that. It's just kind of a cute little thing. And so we have something coming out soon, which is like a questionnaire, which acts as like a Hogwarts sorting hat, you would say, for who your goblin is going to be. But we use the responses to customize some of the pedagogy itself. Essentially, we learn about the students' interests. And if they're into dance or they're into football, whatever it is, we can kind of customize the kinds of problems we show them and how we talk about them and so on. And so that is coming soon. And we have
Very
this
interesting.
teacher cloning avatar feature where they can take a selfie and record their voice, and you can
Hmm.
almost like FaceTime with your teacher. We're going to
Hmm.
introduce goblins along with that also, and it'll make sense soon.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sawyer. It was a pleasure to see it in action, and I appreciate just the intentionality you're bringing to how to get into the sort of side by side, shoulder to shoulder seat with kids as they're working through their math.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you saying that, and thanks for setting this up.
Thank you.